Yes, guys, if you're a football player, I'm going to be breaking down speed endurance profile and why it's so important for you to understand what profile you are. I'm going to help you determine and calculate your own profile and why this is so important for training prescription to maximize your performance on the pitch and improve your recovery in between your high intensity interval drills, your games and trainings, but also for long term development as a football player. So there's three main different profiles. We've got a speed profile, a hybrid profile, and an endurance profile. So essentially, a speed endurance profile is the calculation between our max speed, very up top, and our critical speed. From there, we can then calculate our maximal aerobic speed, which is the lowest speed that we move with maximal amount of oxygen consumption. So essentially, our VO2 max. The reason why that is so important to calculate is because that's going to give us our anaerobic speed reserve. This is where we're going to be operating at throughout the match with all our really high intensity efforts. And the internal and external load performing these activities is going to be really high, but our physiological response to this type of training is going to differ depending on the profile we are. So, for example, athlete A over here has a really high maximal speed, but they've got a really high max speed, but a low maximal aerobic speed. Meaning, when they perform their moderate intensity exercises on the pitch, which is going to be getting in position, jogging around the pitch, nothing too intense, which is a lot of football, they're going to be playing their maximal aerobic speed is going to be below that moderate intensity threshold they're playing at throughout the game. So this is really important to understand because this is something that GPS data doesn't tell us for the individualized athlete. Where if we compare it to athlete B, this athlete is operating in that moderate intensity threshold, which is below their maximal aerobic speed, meaning that this athlete B, is going to have a lot less fatigue compared to athlete A, giving them more energy to perform the entire 90 minutes without accumulating a lot of fatigue, lactate, potentially putting themselves at risk of injury, and obviously having a higher performance throughout the whole 90 minutes compared to athlete A. But then when we come to high intensity efforts, which is going to be our max speed sprints on the pitch, changing direction rapidly, chasing after the ball, whatever it's going to be, athlete A, because they got a higher maximal speed and a fairly similar maximal aerobic speed, this athlete compared to athlete B is going to be performing at a much lower percent of the anaerobic speed reserve, meaning they're going to be getting less fatigued and they're not going to be as impaired damage, so they can recover quicker in between efforts on the pitch, but also their recovery in between games and trainings. This is really important to understand for your own training prescription. So when we come over to what does this mean, every athlete is going to have a different physiological neuromuscular response. It's going to impact our recovery, but it's really important to understand this, especially in the in-season. Because what we know today is that high intensity interval training is going to slowly deplete our fitness bank. And the way we improve our fitness bank is by improving our critical speed, accumulating that throughout the whole season, which is then going to impact our maximal aerobic speed, obviously impacting the rest of our anaerobic speed reserve. So there's three different profiles with different training prescriptions. Speed profiles, they've got a really fast twitch muscle fiber buildup. So they're best going to be suited towards shorter intensity interval drills. And doing intensity drills and tempo drills is going to help migrate some of the negative outcome of continuous fitness drills. So an athlete like this is going to start off with blends, and then obviously you still want to dose in your sport-specific fitness work as well. But sometimes during the season, you're not going to have the recovery to be able to perform this in between your games and trainings without it negatively affecting your performance. So that's where your weekly sprint exposure is going to help improve your football fitness, where sport-specific drills might not be the best choice. Then we go into our hybrid athletes. These athletes have a bit of best of both worlds. This is players like Valverde, where they've got a really high top speed, but they've also got a big engine to perform more of the aerobic maximal aerobic speed stuff as well. So these athletes, it's going to take a bit of process to understand what they best react to, but again, they can't sustain. But these athletes are going to be able to sustain speeds for a little bit longer compared to a player like Mbappe with a really high maximal top speed. Then we go into our endurance. This is going to be players like a Rodri, where they can just run for days. These players best react to slower intensity, continuous drills, or longer interval drills. They best react to moderate intensity stimulus to maximize their performance potential. So this is really important to understand before you flood them with a bunch of really high intensity interval sprints for 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. But of course, you still want to implement the weekly sprint exposure. So here's some data from the Champions League. This is going to give us a bit of an indication of where players are operating at. These are going to be more of our speed bias athletes, and this is typically going to be towards our endurance-based athletes. But obviously, you're going to have some exceptions with Valverde with a crazy high top speed, but he can also run for days as he's a bit more of a box-to-box player. So I hope this gives you a bit more of an understanding, and I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you guys next. Peace.